It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday, and a big shout out to everybody also listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. Well, we got a RealAg Issues panel today. We are locked and loaded on many different topics. We've got Kelvin Heppner of RealAgriculture out of Manitoba, Lyndsey Smith out of Ottawa with RealAgriculture, and we're joined today by Olds Alberta farmer Jeff Nielsen. And like I said, we got a lot of topics to get through. We got the Canada-India relations. We got central banks kind of really facing a bit of a conundrum going forward. Politicians around the world much more focused all of a sudden on affordability. That relates to the previous topic. That and a whole lot more. So looking forward to it indeed. You can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the different social media platforms as Real Agriculture. You can also call the RealAg feedback line. The number is 855-776-6147. Last week on the issues panel, we were talking about when we could see maybe the next Canadian election, as we see Prime Minister Trudeau really suffering in the polls. Phil listened to that program and he said, I always enjoy your Ag Issues panel. I found Friday you were ignoring French Canada, talking about the political issues, as no mention of the Bloc and Liberal support in Quebec or the Conservative lack of it. Specifically, you kept referring to Jagmeet Singh possibly pulling the plug, but keep in mind the Bloc has said they would support the Liberals until 2025. No worries, just thought I would be able to add to the discussion. Appreciate that, Phil. The omission, very much noted, and that's a good catch by you. Appreciate you providing your feedback. If you enjoy RealAg Radio throughout the week, I want to encourage you to check out the podcast RealAg on the Weekend. Now, it plays on the Ralco Radio Network across Saskatchewan, but I want you to check it out. It's a great show. Sometimes it's some of the highlights from the week, and a lot of times it's fresh content for you to engage in that's different than some of the stuff we cover on this show. So check it out. All you got to do is go to realagriculture.com and find it, or go to wherever you get your podcasts and search RealAg on the Weekend. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to get to the RealAg Issues panel. Jeff, Lyndsey, and Kelvin standing by.
CDC Endure is a new oat line from Alliance Seed. High yielding with excellent disease resistance and the quality end users ask for, all in one great oat variety. CDC Endure provides the high beta-glucan levels to make heart-healthy products like breakfast cereals. For more information on CDC Endure oats, as well as any other products from Alliance Seed, check out allianceseed.com or visit any Alliance Seed authorized retailers.
When it comes to your farm, you demand performance, because what goes in determines what comes out. At Pride Seeds, we deliver on performance. With best-in-class corn hybrid seed, you'll see results when it comes to premium yields in all the ways that matter. Moisture, nutrition, dollars per acre, and of course, tonnage. So discover your farm's advantage, the Pride Seeds advantage. Visit your local dealer or prideseeds.com today.
Introducing the Arion 600 Series tractor by Claas, where versatility meets productivity head on, because you've got jobs to do. Mowing, tedding, raking, baling, loading, filling, tilling, cleaning, spreading, hauling, feeding. This is multi-purpose reimagined to do the work for you. It's more than just power. The Arion 600 tractor gets it done.
It's time for the RealAg Issues panel here on RealAg Radio on this Friday. Let's bring in our panel, but first, let's talk about true nitrogen protection. Skip imitator products for an agronomically effective solution like Super U Premium Fertilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. Super U protects against all three forms of loss and is proven to boost yield potential. See how others stack up, all those imitators, at defendyourn.ca. Okay, let's bring in the panel. As I said, up first, it's Lyndsey Smith coming out of Ottawa, Ontario. Lyndsey, how are you doing?
I'm doing so well. How are you, Shaun?
I'm doing good. I feel like this is like what I feel like we do a 3-hour show, but I seriously feel that way.
I feel like we say that a lot, but this one might be true.
It's a fun.
It has,
fun.
It's been busy. That's for sure.
Yeah. It's fall has brought a lot of acceleration in the news cycle. There is no doubt about that. Also here is Kelvin Heppner out of Altona, Manitoba. Kelvin, are you calling in from the Combine, or what's happening?
Not today. We've had some rain or light precipitation here yesterday and today, so we had a good Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, real productive, and I think we are down to one good day left of harvest, but it'll have to wait till next week sometime for when things dry off.
Okay. Harvest really across the prairies, really close to being wrapped up for sure. Also joining us today, coming out of Olds, Alberta, it is Jeff Nielsen. Jeff, how are you doing?
Great, thank you. Great to be here, everybody.
And have you wrapped up harvest?
No, we got the cereals done. The canola just finished swathing it. There is still a fair amount of cereals in my area and canola that's standing. Some has been sprayed to be straight cut. Some, we're not sure if they're waiting to swath or waiting to do what, but really all over the map as far as maturity with the canola around here.
Yeah, I was talking to Neil Townsend from Grain Fox. We're just talking about how canola is really the wild card. Like, it's just so hard to really predict the yield. And not just variability amongst the regions, but variability within a field, which we continue to hear from a lot of growers. Is that kind of what you found as you've been walking around your acres?
Oh, definitely. We had high disease cutworm pressure in the spring. And then with the drought early on in the spring, once the rains hit, you had canola that really rebounded and really looks like it's going to produce. But yeah, that's the unknown. Until the combine actually physically gets in there, we haven't a clue.
Okay, let's get to, I think the topic that has really captured the most amongst Canadians this week is the situation of really, I would say, increased tensions, but a lot of tension between Canada and India. And, for, I guess, in my evaluation, really good reason. Kelvin, by all the events, as far as what we know as of today, do you think Canada has handled this situation correctly up until this point, or what would be your evaluation?
I think it's tough to say. We're going to have to wait for more information. Of course, the Prime Minister chose to go out and announce in the House of Commons the news of what the Canadian government is calling, quote, credible allegations, directly linking India's government with the murder or even assassination of the Sikh separatist leader in Surrey, BC earlier this summer. And has been some reporting since then saying that there is actual evidence of Indian diplomats in Canada talking about this behind the scenes. So I think we need to wait and see how strong the evidence is before we can answer that question, Shaun, because we sure hope that the Prime Minister and the government has very extremely solid ground to go on before making these types of allegations against India, of course, a country that many other major countries and allies around the world are courting as a growing market and looking to make trade deals. In Canada itself, it's hard to believe how quickly things have deteriorated here. Basically, I saw one analyst yesterday say that the relationship is dead right now. It's just dead.
Dead.
And so, well, that was maybe a bit extreme, but it was just 2 months ago that officials from the Canadian government were talking to us about how they were hopeful that we would be able to reach a high-level trade deal known as an early progress trade agreement with India before the end of this calendar year. Well, now any trade deal with India is years, maybe even, a decade away at best. Yeah,
and so just before we move on to the others, this is a Canadian citizen killed on Canadian soil, correct?
But India calls him a terrorist because there is this movement among the Sikh population in India, and a lot of them have moved to Canada to create a separate state called Khalistan, carve it off of India. And so India's nationalist government, the Modi government, is quite nationalist, and so they view these people as they call them terrorists. And so it's and of course Canada has, just for context here, Canada has a huge Indian diaspora. Nearly 4% of Canadians are of Indian ethnic or cultural origin, and a large percentage of those are Sikh. So lots of different things to consider here.
Jeff, how worried does this make you? Just put your farmer hat on. Maybe it's an old wheat board hat, or maybe it's another one. How concerned are you about something like pulse exports being impacted?
I think I don't grow pulses myself. It's been a challenging market for some time. They've been able to use probably some unfair trade barriers to limit our pulse imports into their country at times to support their farmers, which is what every country wants to do, support their own ag producers. But going forward, they are a country that continues to grow in population, a country that continues to need a reliable source for protein products, such as our pulses. So, and not just our pulses, they're actually needing some of our fertilizer too, like our potash too. So they are strong consumers of Canadian products, but can and will they use these as political tools in this latest dispute? That's the $1 million question or $1 billion question right now.
Yeah, a lot of money. It's a very, very much an appealing market to a lot of exporters, but there's that, and then there's also the geopolitical situation of these events as they're unfolding. So now, Lyndsey, what's interesting is in Canada and in the U.S., when Canada first broke, Prime Minister Trudeau first broke that they had this intelligence, went public with it, there was a lot of reporting that the UK, Australia, and especially the US were not exactly pleased with Canada. And I got some audio from yesterday. Now, this is the US National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, I should say, addressing this head on from a U.S. perspective. And I want to get your reaction, Lyndsey. Here it is.
As soon as we heard from the Canadian Prime Minister publicly about the allegations, we went out publicly ourselves and expressed our deep concern about them, our support for a law enforcement process to get to the bottom of exactly what happened and to ensure that the perpetrators are held accountable. I'm not going to get into the substance of private diplomatic conversations, but we are in constant contact with our Canadian counterparts. We are consulting with them closely. We support the efforts that they are undertaking in this investigation, and we have also been in touch with the Indian government as well. And I will leave it at that for today, only to say that I have seen in the press some efforts to try to drive a wedge between the United States and Canada on this issue, and I firmly reject the idea that there is a wedge between the U.S. and Canada. We have deep concerns about the allegations, and we would like to see this investigation carried forward.
Now, Lyndsey, does that give some temporary reprieve on criticism for the Prime Minister, or what? How do you interpret that?
Potentially, and I think what we have to recognize here as well is that we have heard that some of the intelligence that the Prime Minister and our intelligence community received was from outside of Canada. So part of, I believe it's called the Five Eyes Network. So other countries that we work with collectively on intelligence. So Canada is not alone in this per se, as far as the intelligence collection and where some of this information has come from. But I think that was definitely a very clear indication from the U.S. that this isn't at all a wedge between the two countries, that there will be cooperation on this intelligence side. And now, can you extrapolate that forward and say, the U.S. is going to help out Canada and punish India and something? Absolutely not. That's not nearly what we're even, I think, close to having a discussion on. But it does certainly, I think, back up that the intelligence and that the Prime Minister received and that has been brought to light is probably pretty solid, and that I do think it gives some credence to why going public with this, because that of course has been criticized. So I think actually the one we maybe should worry about, and maybe on a couple different fronts, is actually the UK. And if you think about our trade deals with the UK right now, we've got some friction there. The UK, of course, has very strong ties to India. It'll be interesting. I'm interested to see how that plays out and whether or not it creates frostier relationships with the UK.
Yeah, Prime Minister Sunak, he had, I'm paraphrasing, but basically, they did not see this as a barrier to them completing further and increasing trade with India. Right. But he there's some political reasons for that as Labour continues to gain steam against the Conservatives in the UK. We've got some audio hopefully play later on another issue in terms of very similar affordability push by the UK Conservatives, very similar to what we're seeing in Canada with the Conservatives and Mr. Poilievre. Let's take a break. We got to take a break, and we'll get back to more of the RealAg Issues panel right after this.
What's next for your fields? At Pioneer, delivering industry-leading genetics drives everything we do. From the scientists in the lab to our local teams with boots on the ground. We are determined to get there first. Developing top-performing products, proven in more growing conditions than ever before. Pioneer. What's next happens here. Visit pioneer.com/Canada to learn more.
There's a reason we call it the Corn School. Videos on everything from planter setup, weed control, field trial results, yield strategies, and so much more. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF, Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast from your favorite streaming service. Download the latest podcast today.
Kochia sucks.
Big time. And hate it. Really gets in the way. Awful.
But not anymore. Get a head start on tough-to-kill weeds like kochia this fall with Viterra EZ and Fierce EZ soil-active herbicide. Apply after harvest before freeze-up for up to 8 weeks of extended control in pulses, soybeans, and wheat next spring. Viterra EZ, Fierce EZ for kochia. Visit newfarm.ca/kochia.
We're back for the RealAg Issues panel. Jeff Nielsen out of Olds, Alberta, Lyndsey Smith and Kelvin Heppner of Real Agriculture, and myself, Shaun Haney, the host. Lyndsey, during the commercial break, you mentioned that there's some pretty significant exports out of Canada that are food-related that go to India.
Mm-hmm. So just quickly, I did want to touch on this. And of course, we have been covering this from sort of the lentil, the pulse export side. But our number 2 and number 3 exports, number 2 to India is potash, and number 3 is red lentil. So of course, potash for food production. So, and number 1, and thanks to Kelvin for this good eye, is coal, actually.
Oh.
So we send coal, apparently.
Wow. It's just like, we got to put a stop to that.
That's uncomfortable, I guess. But anyway.
Well, there's one of those uncomfortable truths about climate politics. Kelvin, right. I'll ask you very quickly. I want your answer on this. If we're not willing, is there any sort of comparison to the fact that we put a tariff on Russian fertilizer? Would this situation elevate to the point where we would potentially say we're not shipping potash to India, or there's an export tariff on that? Those seem like two different situations. What do you think?
I don't think the Canadian government wouldn't do that in terms of punishing domestic producers. And Mosaic and Nutrien actually just about a year ago signed a deal with India to export, I believe it was 1.5 million metric tons of potash to India annually for, I think it was a 3-year deal. So there is, that fertilizer thing is a question. And there is talk about retaliation over this visa. India has stopped issuing visas to Canadian citizens, and there are sources saying that the Canadian government is considering some type of retaliation there, but I really doubt that it would have to do with limiting exports and revenue back home here. Yeah,
this is definitely going to take up more of the wind in the news cycle next week. This is not one that's ending today, it would feel for sure. Hey, I want to tell you about the all-new Classic Xerion 12 Series tractor. It's redesigned from the ground up to redefine the high-capacity four-wheel drive market. For those of you who need more than just power, power is important, but there's other things as well. Visit claas.com. That's CLAAS.com. Okay, let's jump over to more of a big issue in Ontario, and it involves Premier Doug Ford and the Greenbelt. And yesterday we heard there are weaknesses of Premier Ford, but then there are some strengths. And one of the strengths that man has is his ability to deliver an apology. Let's listen in.
I made a promise to you that I wouldn't touch the Greenbelt. I broke that promise. And for that, I am very, very sorry. I pride myself on keeping our promises. It was a mistake to open the Greenbelt. It was a mistake to establish a process that moved too fast. This process, it left too much room for some people to benefit over others. It caused people to question our motives. As a first step to earn back your trust, I'll be reversing the changes we made and won't make any changes to the Greenbelt in the future. Because even if you do something for the right reasons, with the best of intentions, it can still be wrong.
Lyndsey, was speed the issue here?
No. Well, okay. So in fairness, I suppose, yes, to a degree. This was a process. This was a announcement and a change in policy that happened very, very quickly. Now, as you heard there, Doug Ford, did this in the name of solving the housing crisis. We need more houses and we need them very quickly here in Ontario. And so this is a whole bunch of land. Look, it's ready to go. Away we go. Right. So that was sort of the selling feature. But I'll be honest, the first part of the apology sounds all right. The last part, saying the right reasons and, for, thinking his heart's all in the right place. I'm sorry, but that rings pretty hollow when you see just how many buddies were set to get very, very wealthy off of this. And I mean, yeah, I guess hats off to him. We don't hear apologies a lot from politicians these days. And this is a guy who will do it. At the same time, I don't know that I feel like he's sorry that, it blew up in his face. I don't think he's sorry of the way it happened.
So you make a really good point there that we don't hear apologies very often in politics anymore. There is an element here of real old schoolness to this. Kelvin, does this actually help? Because when I first heard it, I was like, this is so on brand. Because his brand is that he's just this regular guy that is incredibly flawed to a certain degree. What is your reaction from a branding political aspect?
Yeah, I agree. It's very on brand for Ford to do this. And if anybody can pull it off, he can. But I think with every apology and every time you have to rebuild trust, it gets harder. And you lose the ability to do it with every time you play that card. And so that's why so many politicians refuse to do it at all. But I'm curious. The polls, like Lyndsey said, the polls must be showing that this has cost them, and I think they bet that it wouldn't. That housing and the housing development message would be a higher priority among voters, but obviously it hasn't been. I do wonder. I don't think this is the last we will see of this issue, because there was that increase in land value for these developers. $8 billion is what some of the reports were saying the land increased in value from opening up the Greenbelt. What happens to the liability for that now, and our taxpayers going to be on the hook for that because of the province reversing its plan?
Jeff, I want to get your reaction to some data that wrote a story about this week at RealAgriculture.com about a survey that RealAgri Studies did related to the potential merger between Viterra and Bunge. Now, 90% of farmers said they were concerned about consolidation overall. 79% of farmers said they are concerned about this merger specifically. And a majority of farmers also said they don't believe this deal should even go ahead at all. It shouldn't be allowed to do so. What is your thoughts on some of that data? And actually, over 500 farmers answered the survey. So this is not a small population of farmers that answered this across the prairies.
No, and
your thoughts?
I was one of them too. I took the survey and I was quite interested in the survey. And I guess, yeah, I'm kind of, I thought it wouldn't be as a touchy subject. I didn't realize the responses would be that strong. I like how some of the questions and that were asked when you look at farm size by income. A previous entity I belonged to, the Canadian Wheat Board, was great at always doing this, either by acres, usually by acre size. And as always, the larger acre farms that were more supportive of an open market, a freer market when it came to the Canadian Wheat Board. And you can see that in the survey here, that the larger the farms are more accepting of the merger. But in the central Alberta area here, I have a Viterra elevator at Crossfield and one at Trochu, and the closest Bunge would be, I believe, Fort Saskatchewan. So I'm not really, as far as competition, it doesn't mean a lack of competition for me, and I don't see any changes in my local area. So yeah, I was kind of surprised, I guess, with the strength in the numbers saying that they opposed the merger.
Yeah, Alberta more open to the merger happening. It was still against, but the least concerned of the three prairie provinces. Saskatchewan the most concerned. When you do the comparison, Manitoba in the middle of the three. I did mention the number as far, or the percent of people that were not in favor of it going ahead. That was 70% believe that the merger should not be able to proceed. What surprised me, Kelvin, is I understand why people would be concerned. I was actually surprised about that 70% number. Like, there's being concerned, but to have 70% being totally against it, that's the number that resonated with me, that stood out.
Yeah, I agree. It is, and I think I agree with what Jeff said too. There's more stronger opposition to this than what I expected, but it's also, we have to remember that this is a survey, and a survey can ask people what their intentions are, and we assume everybody answers honestly, but it's also easy to speak out and kind of make that protest known in your survey response. It's the same thing we see when it comes to surveys about people's grocery shopping preferences. They'd like their eggs laid by chickens that live with rainbows and unicorns in a green pasture somewhere, but when it comes to paying for it, no, we'll take the regular ones that are raised conventionally, kind of thing. I think there's maybe some of that with this as well, where farmers, yeah, they're not in favor, but I don't know how deep or how strong that opposition would go. And a lot of this also comes down to Bunge's ownership of G3. They have a 25% stake in G3, and that, at least that's the last information that's available. And G3 does have elevators in a lot of the same markets and port facilities in Vancouver, along with Viterra. And so that's where it's that 25% stake. Is that going to be viewed as significant interest under the Competition Act by the Competition Bureau? And we've heard from people that don't think it. Some people indicate, no, we don't think that will be considered significant, and that there isn't a major competition issue here. But I think a lot of it could come down to how the Competition Bureau interprets that significant interest definition.
Can I just hop in here, Kelvin? So from Jeff's perspective, this is one of the things I find interesting. So Manitoba sort of lands in the middle as far as, being concerned about the competition side. Kelvin, your province and certainly even in your area probably has more of that Viterra Bunge mix than some others, with G3 and with Bunge there. Do you see a similar, or do you see that there would be a lack of competition more so in Manitoba, just looking around your area versus Jeff's area?
Yes, there would be a local issue here, and I do think that there's going to be some divestiture that will be forced in Manitoba, because there is a Viterra crush plant 40-minute drive away from me, and then a Bunge crush plant 5 minutes away from me, and so both of those being owned by the same company, I do think that might be a competition issue, but. In the big picture, I think it comes down to more the G3 ownership stake, whether there's conflict here.
Another point I'll make before we take a break here is that, for as concerned as farmers are, and the strength of their feelings in this survey, which I think is pretty significant, this isn't like a 50-50 thing. It's pretty resounding. We haven't heard a lot from farm groups about this deal. And so I find that a little bit interesting. It's kind of untouched. When I talk to grain industry experts or insiders, people that follow the grain industry and know it well, there's this sentiment that this is going to easily happen because of that lack of overlap that all of you alluded to. Let's take a break. We've got more of the Real Ag Issues panel right after this quick break. You're listening to Real Ag Radio, Rural Radio 147.
Dedication. Watching the sunset over your crop is one of life's simple pleasures. The anticipation of it all. We know that feeling. Introducing our new Airflex NXT, our best honeybee header yet with the closest cut ever. Light, fast reacting, and infinitely adjustable. More yield, less time and work. Airflex NXT focuses on the future. What drives your next? Visit honeybee.ca or contact your nearest honeybee dealer.
The Advancing Women Conference, the National Leadership Conference for Women in Ag, is celebrating 10 years of bringing women in ag together. Whether you're a producer, student, entrepreneur, representative of grower association, or corporate agribusiness, invest in yourself in Niagara Falls on November 19th, 20th, and 21st. Visit advancingwomenconference.ca for more information and to register.
Before we get into some of the issues that central banks are facing when it comes to battling inflation, let's talk about the need for New Holland engine oil. If you aren't putting the best in, how can you expect the best out? Now, Jeff, I know you have a New Holland tractor, right?
Indeed.
Yes. Well, you pay attention here. Your equipment's engine oil is a prime example of this. Only New Holland engine oil is engineered specifically to protect your New Holland equipment for the work ahead. Visit your local New Holland dealer to learn more. So, Jeff, as soon as we're done here, you're going to your local New Holland dealership and you're picking up yourself some of that New Holland engine oil to protect your engine. You got it?
Well, after harvest, oil changes are coming up, indeed.
Absolutely. Okay, Kelvin, let's dig in here. The Fed decided to pause, similar to what Canada did. So now what?
Yeah, that is the question. Canada's hold earlier this month, we called it a hawkish hold, as they didn't downplay the chances or odds of further increases down the road. And the Federal Reserve, like you said, held interest rates steady this week, but still indicated it expects one more hike before the end of the year, and to not expect cuts any or as soon as what some people were maybe hoping or projecting. And so I think you could call this a hawkish move, and they're still trying to figure out how to deal with the unemployment staying as low as it has at the same time as inflation staying as high as it has, kind of thing. So they're kind of torn and trying to figure out where to go. And I guess status quo is the choice that North American central banks have made this month.
Just cannot get that unemployment number to really budge. It's moved, but it just really hasn't had the jump up that a lot of central bankers, I think, were hoping and predicting would eventually happen, which would create the ability for them to stop these rate hikes. I guess the rate at which we are increasing the rate, like there's more pauses here in between some of the raises, but there's no just because they've paused doesn't mean that that's the next decision when central bankers get together in both Canada and the U.S. And Lyndsey, affordability, right? I think this is one of the things politically that a lot of countries are facing, not just Canada, is some of the affordability pressures that are being pushed on to the citizens.
So, and this is one of the interesting things that I think we're going to see play out in the next little while, and we are getting indications. I think we've got a clip we can play about that, about how, we even see our Liberal government starting to talk about affordability and grocers and the price of food and all those sorts of things. And is this an indication of potentially some of the policies that have been put in place that perhaps increase the cost of living or the cost of certain items to increase? Is this the beginning of seeing some of those, more climate related policies being pushed back or maybe canceled? Of course, here in Canada, we've heard about the grocers were on trial this week at Parliament. We've certainly,
On trial.
then talked about the price of food. Very much so. Like, it was not comfortable, you guys. Like, so, but at the same time, it's like, so we're going to go after retail and tax them, but we're going to keep a carbon tax on the entire value chain, and we're going to pretend like that's not impacting the price of food.
Yeah.
Like, really? That's a really hard argument to stand behind.
Well, you know what, Lyndsey, to your point, if somebody in the Liberal caucus is not screaming when they all get together saying, like, what are we thinking on this carbon tax increase? Like, one of the ways we could really actually gain back some of what we've lost in the polls and appeal more to that centrist conservative is decrease the rate at which we're going to increase this carbon tax to $170 a ton by 2030. But I'm not sure that's happening, Linz.
No, and so that would probably be a winner. And again, we're not yet officially in any sort of election. We're sort of in that quasi sort of kind of, but maybe by the time we get there, but remember, likely that's 2 years from now. So unless something, even larger happens, maybe we'll see it. But in the interim, let's face it, like the shouting of, we can't afford our bills every month is just getting louder every month, and governments have to do something. And
you mentioned climate policy. Go ahead, Kelvin, and I'll play the clip. Go ahead.
I just have I'd like to climb up on my anti-inflation soapbox a little bit.
Oh, here we go.
Oh, look out, Jeff. Jeff, grab yourself a cup of coffee. This could take a while.
Yeah, this could be a while.
I've been noticing increasing commentary from pundits and the ivory tower types and so on, saying that maybe we should move our inflation target higher, and politicians should be taking pot shots at the Bank of Canada and central banks, basically saying, hey, why are we raising rates? Why are we so focused on this 2% inflation target? Why don't we just let inflation fly and bring rates down, because that'll be good politics? And we've seen this from the provincial premiers. We've even seen it from the federal finance minister, in some ways, the messaging surrounding the latest rate hike, where they were asking the Bank of Canada to hold off on raising rates because of the impact it's having on people. We don't understand, I think too many people don't understand the impact inflation has on people, and especially on the lower end of the income scale in society, because high inflation, wealthy get wealthier because they're collecting high interest rates on their savings and seeing high returns, and people who are just getting by are seeing everything get more expensive, and they don't have savings. They're going further deeper into debt and facing higher interest rates. And so that's why inflation is bad. And this idea, I just like to get the word out there and have it on the record that the idea of raising the inflation target is a bad idea, even if it's cheap political points you can score cheap political points in the short term. In the long term, it's a horrible idea.
Well, we talked to John Scott earlier this week, and he made the point that all the focus is on the big grocers, and affordability of food, but at the same time, the independent grocer is really up against it from a business perspective. This has not been a good period for the independent grocer, as rising prices force people actually more to those big discount grocers and away from their local independent. And that's sort of the challenge. So that I think they're left out of this discussion.
They get bigger and the smaller struggle more. It's a common theme with this inflationary.
Well, it's like the pandemic. We're going to close everybody down, but we're going to keep Target open. And Costco, the local hardware store has to close, but hey, you can go to Lowe's. It's insane. That one will burn at me forever. Okay, I want to play you a clip that Lyndsey had mentioned. This is Prime Minister Sunak in the UK, and he made big news this week in the sense that they're slowing down their climate policy because of affordability. Let's listen to what he had to say.
As soon as we heard from the Canadian Prime Minister public...
And that'd be the wrong clip. Hold on.
I made a promise to you.
And that's also the wrong clip. These are all in the wrong order. Hold on.
So to give us more time to prepare, I'm announcing today that we're going to ease the transition to electric vehicles. You'll still be able to buy petrol and diesel cars and vans until 2035. Even after that, you'll still be able to buy and sell them second-hand. We're aligning our approach with countries like Germany, France, Spain, Italy, Australia, Canada, Sweden, and US states such as California, New York, and Massachusetts. So I'm announcing today that we will give people far more time to make the necessary transition to heat pumps. And to help those households for whom this will be the hardest, I'm introducing a new exemption today so that they will never have to switch at all. I'm confident that we can adopt a more pragmatic, proportionate, and realistic approach to meeting net zero that eases the burdens on working people.
It's a beautiful British accent. Sorry for all the clip mistakes there. Okay, Jeff, is this something that we could hear from Prime Minister Trudeau in the next 6 months as he tries to recover in the polls?
No. I can't see any. No.
Really?
Yeah, there's his mindset, or his political, or his aspirations mindset. It's just a continuation. Like the idea of maybe extending it out 5 years. I can't even think of that. But I can't say anything other. But no.
If there's a leadership change, I think we could see the Liberal Party move in that direction.
Yeah, Kelvin, I'd agree there, but that's just...
Yeah.
Here's what's terrifying.
As long as Stephen Guilbeault is environment minister, and I agree with Jeff. It's not. Yeah.
I kind of like the idea and the exemption, like for people that aren't going to be forced to go to heat pumps in the UK, so they're going to still be able to use their gas heaters and their hoses or something like that. Like that's, I'm curious.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's policy in like Colorado where you can't put in my understanding is you can't put in a gas stove in your house or have it's some of these things are just like, really? Okay. Now, hey, you go to your local Home Depot or your Lowe's or your local independent hardware store and you'll see that there's much more electric weed whippers and mowers than there is gas powered at this point. That's a transition there was a lot of pushback on, but it seems like kind of people have made that transition. So I don't know. Jeff, you shared a link where there's potentially huge climate taxes on shippers on product that is going in and out of the EU.
Yeah, it's some of the potential charges on the freights, and we're talking about container ships and other shipping, like from oil products to food products to whatever. The challenges that's going to be faced is the carbon charges on these vessels coming into UK ports, and it's going to be significant. So where does that get passed down to? The ship owner would have to pay it originally, but then he's going to be raising the freight rates on those ships. So that fresh products out of Central Africa is going to cost a lot more, and that's where it's the cheapest right now, coming out of Central Africa and countries like that to Europe is going to cost a lot more. It's really going to be an interesting situation, I think. Yeah, and
it conflicts with other policies, like as the EU tries to expand its trade footprint around the world. Policies like this, Lyndsey, do not help.
Absolutely not. So this is, again, sort of to that point of the overall affordability. It all comes down to a supply chain and what each component of those things costs. And certainly, I mean, I'm no expert on shipping by any stretch, but we certainly do see where shipping rates, ocean freight rate, these are things that are often sort of measured and followed along as sort of indicators of what's to come. So as soon as we start seeing some significant increases in the cost of getting goods somewhere, we know that it's not necessarily working in agriculture's favor at all.
Well, one thing the Conservative Party of Canada has shown, and we've heard from leader Pierre Poilievre a lot about affordability. That message is clearly having an impact because we have seen quite the reversal in popularity, and it's all centered around affordability. And so if you guys are correct and the Canadian government and Prime Minister Trudeau are not going to respond to that in the name of climate policy, they're in real political trouble, I think. There's one thing making a bad decision, but there's another thing recognizing that you're not willing to admit it. Maybe the Prime Minister needs to take a lesson from Premier Ford. How about that? Let's take a break. We got more coming up here on RealAg Radio right after this.
At Brett Young, we focus on what's real. It's how we became Canada's largest independent seed company. That's why we're asking a real farmer, what do you think of BY6217TF, Brett Young's TrueFlex Canola Hot?
What's that?
BY6217TF, Brett Young's TrueFlex Canola Hybrid with Pod Defender shatter reduction technology and Defender-rated club root and blackleg resistance.
Good yield, yeah. Probably choose it again.
Thanks, Chris. Talk to your Brett Young retailer today to see for yourself. Brett Young, distinct by design.
Boron is an essential micronutrient for plant growth, and without boron, your crops can't absorb the macronutrients they need for higher yields. Although borates occur naturally, boron deficiency is a common soil problem. Whether in direct soil application, through fertigation, or as a foliar spray, US Borax has the right refined product for your crops. US Borax products are specifically formulated to combine with other fertilizers, lowering your application costs. Learn more at borax.com/ag.
It is harvest time, so it's always a good time to think about farm safety. This segment's brought to you by Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. Health and safety doesn't have to be complicated. We've got a new podcast launching at RealAgriculture.com, and it's called the Farm Safety Roundup Series. It's coming soon. The first episode is going to feature free resources and practical advice for harvest season and rural road safety, so stay tuned for that. Okay, we got the Real Ag Issues panel. We are loaded with Jeff Nielsen from Olds, Lyndsey Smith, and Kelvin Heppner of RealAgriculture. You know, Jeff, earlier we were talking about rates, and you recently had to do a mortgage. Share with us a tough decision on what to do between variable and fixed and the lengths of the fixed. What'd you end up doing?
They were just renewing some operating line credits, like some machinery loans, not mortgages. But I went variable. I'm kind of the optimist that interest rates are going to be coming down, maybe not till after Christmas now, but I'd rather have that flexibility for short-term loans, less than 5 years, of doing more variable with those.
Okay, yeah, it's difficult right now. I think it's a really tough decision for people to try to sort it out. I was talking how I did a mortgage, and I went I think it was the 2-year fixed, but that's likely to be the wrong decision.
You really don't know how fast are the rates going to come down. They come down too fast, and you're really going to be kicking yourself. If they don't come down fast enough, you're going to say a fixed rate would have been better.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Kelvin, you're going to say something?
Just surely we must be getting close to the top. I know everybody who farmed through the 80s is probably saying, well, it can go a lot higher than this. But I do think that there are some signs of things in the economy breaking, and we saw how slow central banks were to raise interest rates and how they regretted how long it took them to raise rates at the start of this. And I think they're being extra careful now to not extend the higher rates longer than they have to. And so I think variable or shorter term lock-ins make sense at this point.
Jeff, we're in the season where I keep on getting all these emails about, hey, if you're interested in running for this board, you should put your name up and get involved in the industry. We actually heard from Cam Dahl from Manitoba Pork Council talking earlier this week on the show about how farmers need to be politically engaged. Do we have enough people stepping up, Jeff?
I think we do. I think we need to always keep, as Cam mentioned, it's needed. We need to have the actual producer's voice when we go to Ottawa, and we've known that for a long time. But you also need to have a fresh face when you go to Ottawa, and that's what we actually need to see more on some of these commissions and boards. And we've seen just Saskatchewan go through recently some nominations for some of their directors for some of their commissions, and right now Alberta Grains and Alberta Canola are seeking nominations as well for directors. And I think it's a great time for new producers who want to get involved in their commissions to put their name forward, and probably a time for some of the older ones to say that, hey, I've been around the block long enough. It's time for me to step aside and let somebody new come forward and get some new input on these boards.
Lyndsey, I get a lot of feedback on this topic from the audience, and what comes up a lot is, I just don't have time. It's been drilled into people to have this sort of impossible attempt at what somebody would define as work-life balance. And so I think that's one of the casualties of that is people willing to step up to be involved in boards.
I mean, so, and this is one of those things that's quite interesting is that, when one person, let's say, in your family is serving on a board, it does mean that, everybody else sort of has to fill in for that person being gone. I'm thinking specifically, a situation like mine where, we're both involved in the farm, it really does take a village. I think there's a reason why there's, a certain age group that tends to not serve on boards when you've got young kids at home or you're trying to grow your business or those sorts of things. It can be really challenging. But one of the perhaps positive things, certainly that's come out of, everyone having to stay home for a while, is that I do think, and I can't speak for all boards obviously, but I do think there's more flexibility on the virtual option than there used to be. I know some boards have offered that a certain amount of meetings can be virtual or you can attend virtually and it not sort of go against you. I still think in person, certainly around a board is the best option. But I think organizations recognize that some flexibility might mean that you get, that fresh perspective that you probably really want or need around the board. I personally think it's such an important piece of being a farmer is to actually get involved, if only to, the process of seeing other people's perspectives or meeting people from across the province. And I think it's really, you can learn a lot of things. And I'm sure Jeff can speak to, you also get to have some really cool experiences of working through maybe going to Ottawa and these sorts of things that really you wouldn't get if you stay home all the time. Right. So but it's definitely, it's a commitment and it can be a sacrifice.
Good point on it takes a village. The other component of the family dynamic is, I know for me personally, growing up, it was like an expectation that you would, this is something that you would do to be involved in the industry. Like, and so I think it also becomes a bit of a family pattern too, where you're either in it or you're not. Kelvin, is that? I know your family has some history around some commodity boards. Is that a fair way to put it?
It probably is, yeah. And last week we talked about how the young generation doesn't know how to work hard, and now we're going to talk about how the young generation doesn't know how to contribute to social things like boards. Is that what we're doing here?
Yep, pretty much. Yep, you got it. Way to follow along. I'm glad you're keeping notes.
Yeah.
I do think there has been a cultural change too, where there isn't as much social responsibility. We like to be independent, and I'm not sure that there's as much pressure, whether that's valid or not. But I think there used to be, when we saw each other more often and maybe ran into other people more often, there's more pressure and more leaning on twisting people's arms to sit on boards. And I think maybe we've gotten away from some of that with today's age of social media and not as much in-person interaction. But I do think that boards also need to make it easier. It's important, like Lyndsey talked about, that demographic of people with young kids and busy and getting their businesses up and running and established, and you've got a heavy debt load and you don't feel like you can take time away to go work on an industry board. Those people are still the heart of the industry in many ways, and it's important, or a big part of it, and it's important that they can sit on boards. So it's important their voices are heard, and so I think boards need to, and organizations need to make it so that they can, and virtual participation in meetings is one of those steps, but I think there's also an onboarding process that a lot of boards could do a better job at. It often takes, from what I've seen, at least anecdotally, it can take like 2 to 4 years before you actually understand the background on some of the issues and how things work on a board and how decisions are made and who has influence where and all the behind the scenes stuff. I think just having a good onboarding plan for new directors could go a long way in helping people feel like they're not floundering or frustrated, or like that they're actually actively contributing to their industry and to their board.
Great stuff. Hey, Jeff, we're out of time. Happy the rest of your harvest, okay?
Well, thank you.
Great stuff. Kelvin, you got that one day left. Hopefully it happens this weekend.
We'll try to get it in soon. Thank you.
Okay, Lyndsey, we'll chat with you later. Have a great weekend.
Yeah, you too.
If you have any feedback on today's show, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio, and we will chat again next week. Cheers, everybody.